Knights of Azure. Noun. Country of origin, Japan. Definition, that hoe over there, there and there. Knights of Azure. Spelling T-H-O-T. Knights of Azure.
Tarks Gauntlet.
Knights of Azure 2 Bride of the New Moon is the second installment in the Yuri hack-and-slash series Knights of Azure by Gust Co. and Koei Tecmo. The previous iteration of the game holds very high praise in my mind. While it's clear these games sell on their fan service imagery, the game had what I considered to be some excellently written characters and scenarios. Though its combat was repetitive, the emotional nature of the story had me so wrapped up in the romance and setting. It was the game that truly showed me that the best writing can exist in any package, regardless of how it's wrapped. Because of how highly I regarded Knights of Azure 1, my hopes for the sequel were not the highest. In my mind, the sequel would either not be as inspired or would fail to live up to the mark that the first one left on me. Now, I am a firm believer that games should be judged based on their merits and not the expectations of their predecessor. However, throughout this review, you will hear the first game referenced a great deal. Know that this isn't to detract from or add to the merits of either game, but to better color where my interests as a gamer lie, and to point out the differences for returning players. I will still give credit where credit is due, as asides to any personal opinion or bias I may seem to have. So with that out of the way, let's get to it. Knights of Azure 2 Bride of the New Moon is largely detached from the first game. While many settings are familiar and old characters do return for brief periods, anything that you need to know about them is explained just fine in this game, and the narrative events of the first do not need to be experienced at all. As the game starts, you play as Alush en route to meet an old friend, Liliana. Liliana is a priestess who you have been ordered by the religious governing body known as the Curia to protect. Although you have been separated from Liliana for a long time, the game wastes no time at all in explaining just how these two characters feel about each other and the romantic inclinations between them. Upon meeting up with Liliana, you come under attack and work to save her life. As reward for your efforts and for saving Liliana, the Curia gives you a promotion and a new task. Your new task is to escort somebody known as the Bride of Time to the Moon Queen so that she may be sacrificed. The Moon Queen is a demon threatening to plunge the world into an endless night. The Curia, in their attempts to end the Moon Queen's advances, have unfortunately only found ways to subdue her, and this is done by sacrificing one of their priestesses they refer to as the Bride of Time. In this instance, the Bride of Time is Liliana. The inner struggle between emotions and duty begins immediately as Alush grapples with the reality that in order to save the world from an endless night, she must walk her loved one to her death. Liliana and Alush embark to fulfill their duties without hesitation but are attacked early on, leading to Alush's death and Liliana's disappearance. Alush awakes to find she has been revived through scientific means as a half-demon needing blue blood to survive. Alush gears up and embarks on a new quest, now to find her missing lover and to discover any way to prevent her from being sacrificed. Although we meet many new characters along the way, this is the setup. In many ways, this is just like the first game. In fact, this is pretty much like all of Keisuke Kikuchi's series. Knights of Azure 1 and 2, Fatal Frame 2, 3, etc. The premise of all these games is that one person, often female, must sacrifice a loved one who is also a female to subdue an evil power that threatens the world. While I love the story, the guy who writes it might be a bit of a one-trick pony. Although granted, the stories hardly change, the characters are the true reason to keep replaying this narrative, and we'll touch on them by the end. The story can be beaten in around 10 hours if you focus only on story quests, but to do everything you should to get the best ending will take around the 20 to 24 hour mark, and I'll tell you it's worth doing. One big complaint about side quests in the first entry was the depth of many of them, and while this game does have many side quests with no depth, they are clearly marked and can be beaten passively if they're beaten at all. The other side quests, known as Lily quests, add a lot of background and depth to the characters and truly build on the story in a meaningful way. These are quests that should not be skipped. So we know they fixed the side quests and we know the story hardly changed at all. But what about the battle? Knights of Azure 2's biggest deviation from the first game comes in its battle system, and this is going to be welcomed by nearly everybody. The first Knights of Azure had a battle system very reminiscent to the PS3 title Folklore. You could bring 4 creatures known as servants into battle and manage them with rudimentary orders to defeat enemies. While you could yourself actively participate in battle, you were more of a secondary mechanic, which put you a bit in the back seat during battles. Knights of Azure 2 turns this inside out. Now we have a fully fledged combo system with light and heavy attacks, blocks, dodges, servants, and a support character, instantly thrusting you into the driver's seat of combat. I for one find this a very refreshing change over the original and much more engaging. This time around you bring 2 servants into battle and they must be chosen before you leave the central hub of the game. The servants participate in battle automatically and have stronger attacks mapped to L2 and R2. Some servants also provide special abilities to unlock pathways and grant access to new areas. On one hand, I didn't like that I had to re-enter the same dungeons many times with different servants to make sure I've unlocked every pathway, but at the same time I enjoyed that it gave me a reason to try out new servants I otherwise wouldn't have touched. These new pathways tend to only be for loot and shortcuts, so you're not missing anything essential if you truly don't feel like doing this. In addition to the servants, you can take 1 support character on a mission with you. These support characters are chosen from your reserve of party members that you build up throughout the game. Although you get many girls in your party along the way, you can only bring 1 out on a mission at a time. Why you can only bring 1, I have no idea, but that's just how they chose to do this. The girl you choose as a support will act independently like the servants do, but occasionally special attacks and prompts will occur, which launch some really spectacular joint moves between you and them. Every time you complete character-specific quests, adventure with a support character, or launch joint moves with them, their affinity meter will go up. The higher the affinity, the more bonuses you'll have when fighting with them. Getting the true ending of this game is tied to the affinity meter, so if you're not feeling like you'll have time for additional playthroughs, look up these requirements, because you'll need to start working on them as early as possible. And that's because this game has one function that certainly won't make the game for many people, but it can definitely break it. This entire game is on a timer. The timer is built in such a way that you can only leave the central hub a set amount of times before beating the game, so 100%ing in a single playthrough is a near impossibility, if not completely impossible. Because Alush is a half-demon who recently experienced death, she can only handle so much activity at once. Every time you leave the central hub, you have a set amount of minutes on the clock before you have to return to the hotel and rest. This time starts off small, but by the end you can get up to 20 minutes. 20 minutes is very hard to use. When you leave the hotel, you can choose where you want to go on this map, but you can't travel between destinations. If I play in the town for 5 minutes and want to use my remaining 10 minutes on the clock in the forest, I can't do this. You have to return to the hotel to select a new destination, but when you return to the hotel, your remaining time is just erased, and you're forced to rest. Every time you rest, the moon enters a new phase, and when you hit the new moon, it's game over. This is a terrible setup for anybody looking to do a hell of a lot of the side quests. And by a hell of a lot, I mean basically all of them in one playthrough. This leads to some creative ways of managing side quests so that you can complete as many in one go as possible, but it's something I bet many people will not be able to see the fun in. Being completely honest, I've done a lot of the side quests, and this clock never got in my way, but I can easily see how it might break somebody else's experience, and I really don't think it was worked in as a mechanic as well as it should have been. Now, I've mentioned the central hub a few times, so I guess we'll touch on this lightly before I move on. The central hub is a hotel. It's similar to what we've seen in the first game, but stripped of some features. The arena you used to be able to grind in is gone now and replaced with a pool. As somebody who never used the arena much anyway, I'm cool with this, cause it means I can see Ruinhide in a swimsuit anytime I want. Or any of the other girls, but Ruinhide? Man, I'd ruin her hide if you know what I mean. Bad joke. Bad joke. Basic necessities are also covered here, such as your buying and selling, leveling up using the blue blood you acquired in battle, spending your skill points in a pretty useful and clean skill tree, or leveling up servants using servant points. You also get equipment that can affect characters' base stats when equipped, and this too can be leveled up by combining it with other equipment not currently in use. Overall, this is basically all you need to know in regards to the play mechanics of this game, but there are a couple more things I want to hit on before I get to the one area that I was most skeptical about coming into this game. The world of Knights of Azure 2 is fairly small, but with the game's runtime, I didn't find I was spending so much time in each zone that I actually got tired of them. Not too much is doing anything new for looks or is too inspired. Most areas run pretty darn smooth on the PS4, but I did see some noticeable slowdown in the 2 end dungeons and the Forest of Saints. And aside from some really bad camera issues at times, I thought it all played remarkably well. What you're seeing on the screen right now is a comparison between the Switch version and the PS4 version. The Switch footage was graciously supplied Guide by JRPG, and if you want to see his review of the Switch version, I will have a link to his channel in the description and at the end of the video. The music makes a strong comeback here too. While nothing quite punched the tones of Eve on piano, there were some really great tunes here that punctuated the story strongly.
残念だが、その痛みは消えない。
Costume design is nice, but I do miss the more Victorian-inspired dresses from the first game, because they simply just lended better to the romantic storytelling. Though I gotta give them credit on designing a top that shows undercleavage, overcleavage, and side cleavage all in one. Sound design is unfortunately a bit subpar. It's alright in most places, but some places feel like they lack weight, and some sounds seem to not exist at all. Voiceovers are good, but they're all in Japanese, so if you're looking for English, look elsewhere.
リリアナ、今までどこに、ある、来てくれた。
While I did find the game was translated very well, a couple instances in the beginning had me feeling it'd be a real dumpster fire. Thankfully, these seemed like isolated incidents. The bosses in the game are very hit or miss. Some are simple, fun, some are real tests of ability, some are great concepts with terrible execution, and one of them is literally the most hilarious boss battle I've played since Conker's Bad Fur Day. And now we're in the category that I was the most worried about. The characters. I praised the first game for its romantic writing between Arnis and Lilise. I never thought at that time that this would be a series, and when I found out a sequel was coming, I set my expectations low, or rather tried not to have any at all, and I gotta say that in this department, I'm more or less glad that I did. This isn't to say that the writing is bad, far from it in fact. The writing is actually quite fantastic, but it doesn't hit the same levels as before, and if I expected it to, I would have just been disappointed. There's a good reason why the writing isn't as intimate or romantic in this game though, and it's tied into the overall changes in the gameplay. This game got far more serious about its combat, and about being an action RPG. With this territory came a bunch of new characters and party members. This time around, the player is given the option to choose who they want to pursue romantically. While narratively there's only one genuine answer to this, two if you really want to get into it, each path is fleshed out to seem like a real worthwhile narrative investment, and you'll find yourself chasing all of the paths simultaneously, or at least too many at one time. All of these characters are great and they all have depth and personalities you can grow an attachment to, but no longer having to focus on one character specifically took me from having an overwhelming attachment to just one to having a moderate attachment to a bunch, and I would definitely take the more meaningful one over the many any day. It's not really a bad thing that this game becomes a Yuri harem simulator, especially when it made so many more advancements everywhere else, and didn't really sacrifice much of its writing prowess or character design to do this. But it's definitely not going to leave the same impact on me personally as the first one did. At the same time, this is why I get rid of my expectations before coming in, because whoever said it had to do that. I enjoyed my time with Knights of Azure 2 Bride of the New Moon. While it made some design choices that can definitely be contentious among the fanbase, I found it to be an incredibly fun game with fresh rewarding combat and a nice blanket of emotional draw. As a series, it's definitely taking most of its decisions in great directions, and I eagerly await whatever they do next to see how far they can push this series. And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm sure this is enough information for you to make an educated decision if you ever want to buy this game. Now, before we close this out, let's check out some IMDb trivia. Did you know this is a sequel to Knights of Azure? Well, I'll be. You learn something new every day, guys. Thanks for watching.